Bonjour. Good morning. I'm always happy to be here. Elizabeth May, Parliament for Sandwich Gulf Islands, accompanied by my dear friend and colleague, Jonathan Pedneau, Chef Adjoint, Pâté Vert de Canada. I'm extremely glad to be here because the alternative is being dead. Honestly, June 29th, I had a hemorrhagic stroke where the options were I was either surviving or I was going to die during the stroke. But fortunately, at the time, I didn't know that. I only learned over a period of the following week or so what had actually happened to me. And I'm very, very grateful to be all right, to continue my work, and to be here with you. And I want to thank all the people, particularly colleagues from Parliament Hill, who sent me so many wonderful messages to encourage me to get well and to get back. I want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation, unceded, unsurrendered. To them we say miigwech. I want to try to be disciplined about how I approach what I want to share with you, which is essentially a progress report on where the Green Party is, but I also think where Canadians are, in the response to the questions on foreign interference and the follow-up to the reports that were tabled by former Special Rapporteur on Foreign Interference, the Right Honourable David Johnston. So I will do that. I also, of course, want to speak to the conflagration, the wildfires across Canada, what's happening right now in the Northwest Territories, in my home province of British Columbia, to the people of West Kelowna. I just saw there's a wildfire out of control on Quadra Island. It's not possible to keep up in real time with the places that are threatened. My husband's with me today, John Kidder. We're particularly close to Yellowknife. John was born in Yellowknife. This hits really close to home, and increasingly climate crisis events affect Canadians personally, and it will require a very different approach from all orders of government across Canada. If I have time to get to Green Party views on what we're seeing in terms of fire and flood and extreme weather events, I will. But there's a lot to cover on the foreign interference file. So I'll start there and then take questions. You'll remember, I think a lot of people remember, David Johnston's public report that he released on what he thought would be released May 23rd to meet his first deadline, a first step, and then there would be other steps. We all know what happened. There were not other steps. The special rapporteur process did not succeed. Let me just say from the outset that the Green Party's been clear from the beginning that we needed a public inquiry. Both Mike Morris, Member of Parliament for Kitchener Centre, and myself, and Jonathan and I, as spokespeople for the party, have said from the beginning that the degree of public concern was not going to be met with the special rapporteur process. And I particularly want to draw a line here to say that I recall the day that it was announced in Parliament that there would not be a public inquiry, but we would have a special rapporteur. And that person was not at that point named. I don't know how many of you can remember that moment where it was put forward there'd be a special rapporteur. And I happened to be out in the foyer and entered into a scrum. And Tonda McCharles asked me what I thought of the special rapporteur process. And I just said, and again, no mention of David Johnston at this point, because I think his reputation has been affected by this in a way that's unfortunate. I said, look, that dog won't hunt. I mean, a special rapporteur is not going to cut it with the degree of public concern that's been created by leaks from CSIS, media coverage of allegations, et cetera, et cetera. So let's just set that in the background context that where Greens have been from the beginning is we're going to need a public inquiry, we're going to need to build public trust in our institutions, and we're going to need to do that in a way that is as transparent as possible. I want to, in that context, thank David Johnston for his service to this country. It's been very, very hard as a member of Parliament to vote that there has to be a public inquiry. It wasn't a lack of confidence in the personal integrity of David Johnston, far from it. It just was a process that wasn't going to work. I've gone over his first report carefully, and as you may recall, he, in that report, said, look, I've been able to see all the top secret documents. I can't share that with all of you. But he did say I've prepared a report and a supplementary confidential document that people can see in a confidential annex if they have top secret security clearance, and there was an invitation to leaders of opposition parties to obtain top secret security clearance. Progress report, as of now, as far as I know, the only two opposition leaders to have accepted that invitation were leader of the New Democratic Party, Jagmeet Singh, and I've seen in the media recently only that he's cleared he now has top secret security clearance, but has not yet looked at the documents. I have obtained top secret security clearance and have looked at all available documents, and I want to report to you on what that looks like. I want to also start by emphasizing the parts of David Johnston's report, which when I go over them again these months later, haven't gotten, I don't think, enough attention and do at least from my point of view, merit support. So looking particularly at his comments, which I think are very important, on the nature of the leaks. At page 17 of his report, he says, quote, leaking secret intelligence is unlawful and a breach of duty by the leaker. It cannot be justified by any frustration the leaker may have with the government's response. Clearly, it undermines confidence that our Five Eyes partners would have in Canada if members of our own security and intelligence establishment decide on their own volition that something needs to be sent to reporters. Now, these leakers have managed to be cast in a number of media stories as whistleblowers. I don't think the term whistleblower can apply. A whistleblower is someone, and I've been in that role myself, sees something illegal going on. I resigned my position as senior policy advisor to the Federal Minister of Environment in '88 because I thought what happened was illegal. A couple of years later, a federal court decision confirmed that what had happened was illegal. I took consequences. It affected my life. It wasn't clandestine. Look, what David Johnston said is these leaks, any responsible intelligence professional knows how destructive and dangerous leaks can be. They cause mistrust. Again, quoting from this report, it is a matter of urgency that all efforts be made to identify and hold the leakers responsible. Malice cannot be ruled out, close quote. I emphasize those words because foreign state interference in our electoral process is a threat to democracy. So is interference in our political process from agencies of the state. I'm old enough to remember the 2005-2006 election in which the commissioner of the RCMP, Zaccardelli, interfered in the election process. It was found by Paul Kennedy, the commissioner for RCMP Public Complaints Commission, in an investigation subsequent to that election, that Zaccardelli violated RCMP protocols in focusing attention on what turned out to be erroneous accusations against former Minister of Finance Ralph Goodale. This may seem like ancient history, but the reality of this country is that the state police interfered in the 2005-2006 election in order to cast the election in favor of the Conservatives. And we just walked by it as if it didn't matter much. So when CSIS, unnamed, anonymous leakers, say they're whistleblowers, and leak selected information that has a political impact, of course. I'm not saying they had partisan motives, but I want to underscore what David Johnston has said here. It's a matter of some urgency that all efforts be made to identify and hold the leakers responsible. And I worry, as leader of a political party, leader of the Greens, not a partisan of any other party in the House of Commons, I worry that trying to find out who did this will be cast as a political witch hunt with partisan motives. Every Canadian should care to ensure that our security and intelligence establishment be reliable, that the people who work there take their oath seriously. In order to obtain top secret security clearance, to be able to look at the documents which I've now examined, the Privy Council Office and the security and intelligence establishment that conveys this designation to me Had to make very sure I understood that it's an offense to release top-secret information. Understood the threat it would mean to Canada if documents that are held as classified and secret were released. I think we've lost track of the fact that people within CSIS did this deliberately. We don't know their motives. We don't know who they are. And they seem to think that they can be protected by their own narrative that they're whistleblowers. I don't buy it. I'd like to see it. I'd like to be absolutely certain that we know what's going on here. And as I've said in the House of Commons, and I think I'm the only member of Parliament who's spoken out in the House of Commons on this, we do kind of know that CSIS intelligence can be unreliable. Just ask Maher Arar. I want to know. I want to get to the bottom of things. And I'm not satisfied until we find out who the leakers were and they're held accountable. That said, the process that I've encountered, let me just explain what I've gone through so far. I finished my security clearance and then I was told that I would be able to see top secret documents in a secure environment. I would not be able to take notes. I'd be able to read things. I obviously can't commit them to memory fast enough to make and obviously know that when I read something that's top secret, I can't make note of any specific form of words or share anything about it. But I kind of was worried, so I'm looking at boxes of data. And how am I going to read it all fast enough? And how long is it going to take? Because I obviously can't take anything with me. It was then something of a surprise to find that what I have had access to is exactly two documents. One is a 20-page summary from David Johnston, which is footnoted extensively, and the other is his final report, which is 5 pages only and all entirely confidential. Let me refer to page 3 of the public report to quote from what David Johnston explained we would find. Quote, "I've included a confidential annex to my report that addresses the major media allegations in detail and includes citations to the intelligence documents and other products that led me to my conclusions. The purpose of this confidential annex is to permit individuals holding appropriate top-secret security clearance to review my conclusions and judge whether they are warranted based on the full information contained in the annex." So, c'est une surprise pour moi que ce n'est pas pour moi, les documents essentiels, ce n'est pas disponible, pas du tout. What I read is a 20-page summary, and yes, it included citations. I've verified with Privy Council Office security officers that I'm allowed to say this much, that the citations and footnotes were to documents described by a title of the memo, the author of a memo, the date, and often the designation of how top secret that document is, and a page number. I had presumed from the way David Johnston described this that I'd be able to, or any opposition party leader having obtained top secret security clearance could read the memos themselves and obviously not divulge what the memos said, but reading it, think, I can see why David Johnston reached the conclusion he did. It was reasonable. But all I got was the footnotes. In other words, at this point, this week, having gone through what was available to an opposition party leader with top secret security clearance, I can't conclude that David Johnston's conclusions were reasonable, nor can I conclude they're unreasonable, because all I got was a footnote to a document I couldn't see. So I asked the Privy Council security folks, pardonnez-moi, pardon. I asked, s'il vous plaît, on doit liser les documents eux-mêmes. C'est pas possible de rendre une conclusion sans accès aux documents officiels. But at this point, the door is not closed in my face on this. They are reviewing my request to make the memos themselves available to members of Parliament who have top secret security clearance. I disagree, obviously, profoundly with other opposition party leaders who think that this would gag us to go through this process, that it limits our ability to speak on the matter. I would urge Yves-François Blanchet, Pierre Poilievre to rethink this. I think if we operate as a group together, it's better. So far, in Parliament, on the question of public inquiry, leaders of Conservatives, Bloc, NDP, and Greens, we've taken the same view at every stage. We need a public inquiry. But on this, we took different paths, and I don't want this to be partisan. I think the real one of the reasons why leaks of the kind that we've seen to the media are so destructive is that we're in a hyper-partisan environment, and in Parliament, partisan advantage and, that gotcha moment and that kneecapping moment and the question of the day forever in question period around whatever the latest scandal or thing or whatever is not helpful for democracy. If we could be less partisan, it would help us fight the climate crisis. Be less partisan, it would help us buttress our democracy against multiple threats. I've mentioned the threat of foreign state-directed interference, which is the focus of David Johnson's report. But I also mentioned threats from internal actors who could disrupt democracy. But we mustn't forget the role of social media, of the platforms that promote disinformation, and those are referred to as well by David Johnson in terms of, we know the experience of Brexit in the UK, the U.S. election where Putin disinformation assisted Trump. I mean, these are not any longer far-fetched scenarios. But we do need, as a country, to find ways to heal divisions, be less partisan, and more prepared to pull together. And if we didn't see that before the whole country basically being on fire this year, we've had up till now 12 million hectares of Canada has burnt in the 2023 season, which is not yet over, compared to 1.6 million hectares last year. 1.6 million for all of last year, 12 million so far this year. This is, if we can't see that we are in a shared emergency, we have a lot more in common than in the difference. And one of the things that, again, about nonpartisanship, you might think it's impossible when you're talking about climate to be nonpartisan. But in the month of May, we had regular briefings as party leaders, and I mean including on Zoom Pierre Poilievre, and including Yves-François Blanchet, and including Jagmeet Singh and me, and members of our own parties, getting updates from the then Minister of Emergency Preparedness, Bill Blair, as to what we were seeing across the country and how we were responding. And Rick Perkins, Conservative member of Parliament from South Shore St. Margaret's, his constituency was one of the places being ravaged by wildfire. There was allyship in a way that we don't see much in Parliament at that moment. We were basically all saying, okay, what can we do to help? That's how Canadians would like to see us respond to the climate crisis. But I'd also say, I'm sure Canadians would like to know that we're prepared to say, I don't want to take some cheap shot in a highly charged political context over foreign interference or any other issue, frankly. We need to find ways to heal the country and pull together more. So I'll stop there to say that I am expecting a response from Privy Council office. They've made very clear to me that the answer, because they haven't yet been able to give me an answer as to whether I can see the top secret documents upon which David Johnson based his conclusion and which are laboriously referenced but unavailable. A document that is laboriously referenced but unavailable does not help me do what David Johnson said we'd be able to do, which is see how he formed his conclusions and add whether we agree or disagree that his conclusions were reasonable. I can't agree or disagree without being able to see the documents. So at that, I'll close at that point, and certainly, Jonathan, do you want to? We'll take, yeah, yes, yes, questions, yes.
Ms. May, this seems to violate what Johnson actually said. I mean, the quote is, the purpose of this confidential annex is to permit individuals holding appropriate top secret security clearance to review my conclusions and judge whether they are warranted based on the full information contained in the annex, you're talking about CSIS interfering. Do you feel like CSIS is actively obscuring the ability to do your job here?
I don't think so. I don't have evidence for that. But I do believe that David Johnston's words in saying, here's the plan. I'm sad this can't be as transparent as I'd like. We're talking about top secret security clearance. That's what he said. He talks top secret documents. He talked about what he was able to do, who he interviewed, et cetera. But he said, here's the plan. There will be a confidential annex, and anyone with top secret security clearance, and he didn't say just anyone, he said opposition party leaders can seek to get this top secret security clearance, right? So I was prepared, having had top secret security clearance, having been placed in a secure room and told I'd now see what there is. What I got to see was a 20-page summary and a 5-page final report. And in the 20-page, which is very clearly his confidential annex as referenced throughout his report, as you quoted, I thought references to documents would be to documents that I could read.
Pensez-vous qu'il y a une possibilité que M. Johnston ait inventé des citations des documents?
Je ne sais pas, mais j'ai demandé à l'équipe le bureau de conseil privé parce que je pense que c'est vraiment possible que c'est une erreur. Parce que dans les mots de M. Johnson, je pense que c'est tellement clair. L'idée, c'est que les députés, les chefs de parti dans l'opposition, avec le droit de lire les choses tellement secrètes, ont le droit de lire les mémos, les rapports de CSIS et de l'autre opératif de notre établissement sécuritaire.
Pensez qu'il existe une possibilité que M. Johnson a mal rapporté les mémos auxquels vous n'avez pas accès?
C'est possible, mais ce n'est pas possible pour moi de dire oui ou non sans l'accès au document original. J'ai seulement le droit, actuellement, de lire les citations.
Vous ne lui faites pas confiance, clairement.
C'est pas possible d'avoir confiance en quelque chose d'invisible. Je ne manque pas la confiance. It's not that I don't trust David Johnson. I think he's a fine person. And I don't know that he understood that what would be released to me as a leader of an official opposition party, not official opposition, a member of an opposition party with top secret security clearance would come down to a 20-page report with citations, footnotes, to documents I can't read. So I can't I want Canadians to have confidence in our elections, our institutions. I'd love to be able to confirm there's no evidence that blah, blah, blah. But I can't if all I've got is the conclusions David Johnston reached in a summary confidential annex, which points me to, in detailed footnotes, documents you can't read. I mean, the benefit of footnotes is that the curious reader of any particular piece of literature can go find the original document and read it. Never forget when I went through Bjorn Lomborg, God help us.
Il pourrait avoir inventé ça. Il pourrait avoir inventé les références, selon vous.
Non, c'est pas possible pour M. Johnson d'inventer les références. C'est les vrais documents, mais c'est les documents. Je n'ai pas l'accès aux documents originaux. Let me be very clear. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm reporting on where the process stands as of now. I'm open to the possibility that this is a mistake that took place between Johnston putting his pen down and me being the first person who's cleared top secret security clearance and gone to look at the documents. I hope that my colleague, Mr. Singh, when he has a look, will support the call. And perhaps before he even gets to the document process that I've been through, we will have had a change in the access to documents so that the documents that are referenced with citations are themselves available. Because if I can read the same document David Johnson read, and it's top secret, obviously don't divulge what was in it, but I can completely read a document and say, his conclusion for instance, just picking one out at random, that there were no warnings to the Prime Minister, blah, blah, blah. If that's very clear from what I'm reading, I say, well, he reached a reasonable conclusion based on the top secret security information he had. But all I have at this point is his conclusion and a footnote to a document that I can't read. Until I can read the documents, and I know they're top secret, I will never divulge what's in them. I understand the difference between his first report, which is a public document, and very useful to pick up and review again what his terms of reference were and what he concluded. But this document, as we've pointed out a couple of times, makes it very clear that the confidential annex is to allow people with top secret security clearance to review conclusions and judge whether they are warranted based on the full information contained in the annex. What I'm sharing with you today is there was not full information contained in the annex. There were only footnotes to documents I couldn't see. Yes, sir.
Just on the wildfires, do you think it's time for the federal government to rethink its responsibility and how it does things when it comes to fighting these? Are we always responding to these disasters too late?
I want to publicly state, which I've done already to Minister of Emergency Preparedness Harjit Sajjan and directly to Richard Cannings, Member of Parliament for South Okanagan and West Kootenay. I completely agree with Richard. We need to see a federal effort at a permanent forest fire fighting force. It needs more resourcing. We don't have enough. I mean, back in 2019, in a Green Party submission, we said we need to buy more water bombers. We need to be prepared. We haven't done that. And at the level of who buys water bombers, the federal government is still wondering, is that's really provincial responsibility, or can we buy water bombers? Let me underscore that right now where we are, just to benchmark it, this year the world is at approximately 1.1 degrees Celsius global average temperature warmer than what it was before the Industrial Revolution, 1.1 degree. We pledged to hold to as far below 2 degrees as possible and preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius in Paris in 2015 in the Paris Accord. That's a Canadian and world legally binding commitment that we are blowing by quickly. The world right now is at 1.1 degrees Celsius, global average temperature increase, and we're experiencing devastating fires on all corners of the globe. Extreme flood events, heat domes that kill thousands of people, extreme weather events from tornadoes, and the hurricane season coming up will not be a good one because we've also had a heat wave in our oceans. We need to be prepared for climate emergency events of all kinds, and we need to be better prepared, and we need to, at all orders of government, and especially First Nations government, need to be more empowered and have more resources. All of this needs to be rethought without, again, absent partisanship, rethinking the function of our government. Everybody in government, anyone elected to public office, will say, our job is to protect people. That's clear. I mean, the poor people of Lahaina, Maui, look at that. I'm like, they didn't use the, I mean, we should learn lessons from things, even from Portapic, right? We should have learned the lesson that when you have the mass casualty event, don't use Twitter and cell phones to warn people of a public emergency. Use sirens. People in Maui, there were sirens, they didn't use them. They used cell phone warnings. One of the things we know, and John and I have lived through heat domes and fires and floods, that in major climate emergencies, two things tend to happen. Landlines stop working and cell phones stop working. We need to rethink our emergency warning systems and preparedness to things like sirens. In the Ottawa area, we have tornadoes. Have we prepared places for people to get underground and pull the trapdoor shut over themselves? No, we're still acting like, what do you do in a tornado? Well, you stare at your phone. We need to rethink our response to extreme weather events, and we also need to rethink our obligation to reduce carbon emissions to those levels that will avoid levels of climate crisis to which we cannot adapt. We're on a very, very, very knife edge here. We still have time to avoid those levels of climate emergency that are beyond human civilization's ability to adapt, but we are no longer able to avoid significant impacts that threaten human life, threaten communities, and of course threaten our economy. And again, flip side of that is we have opportunities, economic opportunities in moving away from fossil fuels that give, that provide a hopeful economic scenario for our future. But there's no point pretending that the status quo works for us. The status quo, however described, is our enemy. The status quo, CEO of Suncor deciding to say, oh, we've spent too much time wondering about going to a transition to low carbon. Time to get back to basics and get as much oil out of the ground as possible and make as much money as possible. So at that level, CEO of Shell saying pretty much the same thing, defines a new criminal class, big oil as organized crime. We have to be prepared to say, look, we are not here doing something political. Those people who died in Maui, for the love of Christ, people who died, 619 British Columbians died in 4 days in summer of 2021. These are not imaginary threats. They're real. And absolutely to your question, we have to rethink how we respond.
I have a bit of a double-barreled question about your briefing. I'm wondering if you could kind of paint the scene when you went in. Is this a windowless room? Is it digital or printed documents? How many minutes did you spend in that room? And if you could just tell me, what exactly did you learn? Because it seems like you're highlighting parts that you think are important to Canadians, but I'm not sure if there were, I'm not asking you to divulge confidential information, but specific themes. I learned more about this facet of what you talked about.
Okay. Well, it's a good question. It was in I hope I made clear, these documents can never be examined anywhere but in a secure location. It wasn't a windowless room, but it was a room where the Venetian blinds they actually made the point to say they're kept at exactly the same angle throughout the time that anyone's in that room to make sure that no one across the street can use a telephoto lens and get access to any top secret document. It's very controlled. They're very careful. But I have to say, I expected to have a larger brain burden of reading and comprehending top secret documents before leaving the room. Other than the 20-page summary document and the 5-page final report, I didn't see anything else. Be clear. So that means there's a lot I didn't see that I'd expected to see, and I still hope to see it. I'm leaving that door is still open. I'm hoping that they'll decide that David Johnson's confidential annex isn't valuable to the reader without access to the documents on which he based his opinion. I'll also say that I did learn things which I can't share with you, but nothing that makes me feel gagged about anything important. There are aspects to, and it's described, actually most of it is described in his May 23rd report. He describes in some detail alleged irregularities in the question of Han Dong's nomination process and a competitor for that nomination and whether there was interference and so on. They get into a lot more detail on that that's viewed as confidential and top secret in the documents. I now know about that. To the extent that I know about it, it supports what was in this report. But there's so much more that I thought I was going to find out about that because, and again, it goes to where some things were leaked to the media, and David Johnston's report says, oh, but if people had seen X, X, and Y, they'd see that report was either draft or partial or whatever. If I don't see, if other members of Parliament, if Jagmeet Singh and others don't see the documents upon which David Johnston based his opinion, we're really wrong-footed to say, well, we believe David Johnston because, but he wanted us, I think he wanted us to be able to read the things he read, but not talk about them, not divulge them. And that's why I'm trying to be very, very careful that nobody thinks I'm making any accusations of of a wrongdoing here. I think it's a mistake. I think a plain reading of David Johnson's report makes it clear we were supposed to see the documents that are referenced, but not divulge them ourselves at all.
Madame, si au final, il décide de ne pas vous donner accès aux documents, qu'est-ce que ça va vouloir dire pour vous? Est-ce que ça va encore plus augmenter les craintes que vous avez par rapport à certains membres du SCRS qui pourraient bloquer accès à des informations?
Oui, c'est une question hypothétique et je pense que c'est toujours une erreur de répondre aux questions hypothétiques parce que j'espère que la décision sera oui. Ici, lisez les documents confidentiels, secrets. Sans l'accès aux documents, le document officiel original, il reste impossible de rendre une conclusion positive ou négative. Et dans un contexte si partisan que maintenant, je veux augmenter pour les citoyennetés du Canada, du Québec, québécois, une raison pour confiance dans notre système. Sans accès, c'est pas possible pour moi de faire l'effort pour augmenter le niveau de confiance. Je peux, comme une députée, je peux, comme un citoyen, que notre société et notre démocratie est maintenant menacée par, il y a plusieurs des menaces, particulièrement l'interférence étrangère, mais plus l'influence de médiatiques sociaux, le Meta, Facebook et leur effort, la désinformation, et particulièrement le niveau de partisanerie mauvais, pire, chaque jour, après chaque jour, un peu, et nous avons nourri notre santé comme une communauté nationale. So I'm obsessed a bit by the notion that we are, as a country, increasingly divided, and we need to find ways to pull together. I had hoped, by putting my hand up and saying, okay, I'll go through the process, I'll see if they'll take me for top secret security clearance. I mean, it's not a done deal. You don't know when you put your hand up and say, okay, I'll do this. It took quite a while. I cleared. But I didn't get access to the things I thought I would by getting top secret security clearance. So I can't do the thing I had hoped I'd be able to do, to say to Canadians, okay, I've looked, and either I think David Johnson was wrong here or right there. I can't conclude anything without access to those documents, and I still hope I'll get them.
Madame Lé, à quel moment vous aimeriez avoir accès à ces documents et est-ce que vous voulez que ça soit avant l'annonce d'une enquête publique, que vous ayez pu prendre connaissance des documents?
J'espère que oui. J'espère que très tôt. C'est pas, il fait l'effort dans l'équipe du bureau de conseil privé de trouver une réponse pour moi avant ce moment. J'ai parlé plusieurs fois avec l'équipe du bureau de conseil privé. Mais bien sûr, avant le moment d'annonce, et j'ai oublié de mentionner que j'ai parlé quelquefois avec le ministre Dominique Leblanc. Parti vert a aussi donné les noms des peuples que nous avons pensé peut-être sont les bons choix pour commissionnaire pour une enquête publique. I want to emphasize that we have been part of discussions, particularly before the House rose in June, and put forward names of people. So we are part of this discussion of having a public inquiry. Certainly, if I understood your question well before they announce a public inquiry, I hope I'll know, am I going to get to see the documents I need to see to know what I want to say about whether the confidential annex helps me say what David Johnson, I believe, thought it would help a reasonable person say? So a reasonable person with access to the information can read it and share their conclusions, but without access to the documents, you can't. I do want to mention that one of the things the Greens have emphasized, because there's a couple of points of difference between the parties. As a party, we believe that it shouldn't be restricted to only the People's Republic of China, but should include other state actors. It should be more open-ended than one country only. And we also believe that to make this work, if it can work, it will require that all opposition parties support the choice of commissioner or commissioners. That's critical. Yes.
When you asked Harjit Sajjan about a permanent federal firefighting force, in what format did you ask him, and how did he respond to that?
Well, I'm pretty casual with colleagues in Parliament. I have to say, I've been emailing since my stroke with a bunch of different, and particularly new ministers who've just walked into their portfolio. So I'd been working quite closely with Bill Blair when he was Minister of Emergency Preparedness. I sent a note right away to Harjit Sajjan, let him know that I supported Richard Canning's proposal. I also asked him about, could you get an inventory of water bombers? Can we figure out what we have versus what we need? So it's been an email correspondence. It's been wide open. And one of the reasons and he's also been one of those members of Parliament who wrote me a personal note hoping I'd get well soon. So it's been pretty organic, seamless, and not terribly formal.
How has he responded? Is he open to the idea?
Open, as far as I can see. Open to everything. And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I didn't. His initial response was to say he'd look for more information, see if he could get me a briefing on where we are on water bombers. So it's a conversation as opposed to position taking.
Sorry, I might have missed this earlier. Still working I might have missed this earlier. I'm still working on my French. But is there a specific timeline that the Privy Council's office gave you with regards to your request to actually view the memos?
I have to say, they've been incredibly responsive. They called me several times yesterday trying to get me an answer because I let them know I was going to do a press briefing today. And I said, if I say the following things, am I breaching my top secret? Am I allowed to say it was a 20-page document? Yes, you can say that. Am I allowed to say the citations worked like this? You can say that. I'm careful. I don't want to breach anything, unlike whoever thinks they're a noble whistleblower. Anyway, I'm careful. But all I know is they're doing their level best to get me an answer fast. But there's no timeline.
Also, considering you guys ran on a joint ticket and you refer to each other as co-leaders, Mr. Penno, did you make any attempt to review these documents or try to obtain any clearance?
No, this is something that should sit with members of Parliament who sit in Parliament. Yeah.
And Jonathan and I mean, we share a lot, but I won't share top secret security clearances with him. But everything else we share.
Je peux vous entendre en français sur ce que vous pensez des leakers, des gens du SCRS qui auraient donné des informations aux médias.
Oui, les leaks, c'est un nouveau mot en français pour moi, les leakers. Il a fait une chose illégale. Il a fait une chose qui était violation à leur droit secret au peuple du Canada, au Canada, pour garder secret l'information confidentielle. C'est le plus secret document dans le cadre du gouvernement. Et quelqu'un anonyme ou quelques personnes ont décidé de envoyer documents tellement secrets contre notre loi aux journalistes. C'est aussi illégal pour les journalistes, mais ça, c'est une question tout à fait différente. C'est les leakers qui a le droit et qui a accepté ce droit de protéger les secrets du gouvernement du Canada, du peuple du Canada. Et c'est tellement important de chercher les leakers et pour y faire rendre imputable.
Est-ce que vous croyez qu'ils ont agi avec malice, avec des mauvaises intentions?
Je ne sais pas, mais encore, je cite les mots de M. Johnson, ce n'est pas possible d'éliminer la possibilité de malice. Je ne sais pas. Mais pour moi, je me souviens l'épisode de M. Zaccardelli de JRC qui a fait quelque chose vraiment avec malice. Personne connaît les motivations parce que dans l'enquête sur ce moment, par la commission de GRC de plainte publique avec le commissaire Paul Kennedy, Et il manque le pouvoir d'exiger le témoignage de M. Zaccardelli. Il a demandé et M. Zaccardelli a dit non. Et il a fait un bon job à Interpol à Rome. So, mais nous n'avons pas une seule réponse aux questions pourquoi M. Zaccardelli a décidé de faire les choses contre le protocole de GRC pour influencer notre élection en 2006. But we know it happened. It was documented at the time by the commissioner on the Public Complaints Commission on the RCMP. And we know that when they finally finished their investigation in the RCMP, some of you will remember this one, it's almost 20 years now, but the idea that Ralph Goodale did anything wrong. I remember Rick Salutin wrote a column in the Globe and Mail that said, it turned out for less than the cost of your average bathroom renovation, one official deep within Finance Canada might have benefited, but it was basically, a great deal of furor over nothing. But in the course of that, the polls tipped from favoring a Paul Martin minority government being reelected to Stephen Harper becoming Prime Minister in 2006. So it's not without really large consequence that the RCMP implicated themselves, or at least that Commissioner Zaccardelli did back in 2006 and changed the course of a Canadian election. So I've spoken of this before. I've written about it. If anyone wants to look up the details, or my footnotes are findable, by the way. But if you want to look up a book called Losing Confidence, that's a book I wrote that has a whole chapter called Police State that includes the details of the various ways in which Zaccardelli violated normal RCMP protocols on how you handle telling the public when you've opened an investigation into a named individual.
How much of a priority is the foreign agent registry for your party?
I'll let Jonathan answer that too. Because that's one there's a party answer that we can answer. I think it's a significant priority. But do you want to speak to the foreign agent registry? Or anything else, actually, because you've been waiting.
No, it's fine. Yeah, we don't want to keep you for too long. I think this is something that could be useful, but we also have to remember that other countries, such as Russia, for example, or China, are using foreign registries to clamp down on civil society and organizations that defend human rights or environmental organizations. So this is something that needs to be navigated in a very cautious way.
Yeah, we're Jonathan, having had most of his life experience in working overseas, and particularly in the area of human rights, is well aware of the ways in which we have to be careful as Canadians. And one of the things that comes out in David Johnson's report, which I want to emphasize again, is when we talk about foreign agent registries and we get focused on one country, and this is something certainly that colleagues in Parliament like Jenny Kwan have mentioned, I mean, we don't want to be contributing to stigmatization of certain groups within our country, of a diaspora from China, or for that matter from Russia. We have to actually pay attention to what's a foreign state intervention in our system and what runs the risk of increasing a kind of unformed conspiracy theory, populist atmosphere that increases, to be blunt, racism. We really have to be careful in how we look at all of these issues to protect Canadian values, protect the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but not be naive about the fact, and David Johnson's report doesn't sugarcoat it at all, that there are foreign state powers interested in Canada and they would like to influence our politics. They don't necessarily support one party or another, but David Johnson's report finds many deficiencies in how intelligence reports are communicated, essentially up the food chain, and certainly having sat through the debates in Parliament, they're not really debates, but the shouting matches over foreign interference often come down to an MP standing up on one side of the House saying, it's not possible that blah, blah, blah was being found by some intelligence report, and it was not possible that wouldn't have ended up on the Prime Minister's desk. Well, it's very clear from my knowledge of how things work around Ottawa, just like, but also David Johnson's conclusions on this. It's totally plausible to me that things like that don't end up on the Prime Minister's desk unless they're really a lot clearer than what we think they were. I said, I want to look at those documents so I know for sure. But we, as a country, need to have a foreign registry. We have a lobbyists registry. That's important to have. But if we have, and again, it gets very murky. If an embassy in Canada is enhancing the cultural activities of the diaspora from their country with donations, that's normal. At what point, we need a lot more clarity about it. At what point does that become interference in our politics? And that's one of the things that if we can design it well and have a public discussion and come to some agreement of what we do going forward, that would be very helpful because we're not going to see less of it. We're only going to see more.
Sorry, can I go back to the fires for just one more second?
Sure.
There was an article in The Atlantic last week that kind of made the argument that this summer the world has entered a new era that's marked by the intensity and volume and widespread nature of these fires, and they called it the pyrocene, and it's something that we've never encountered before, despite climate change taking effects over the last however many years. Do you think we've entered a new era this summer?
Whether it was this summer, one could say it was 2005 and Hurricane Katrina. We've had enough wake-up calls to be awake a long time. But yes, we no longer have the world we once had. I very much resonate to what Premier Carolyn Cochrane, the Northwest Territories, said, that she's sick of hearing the word unprecedented. Of course it's unprecedented. We are in a new era. Our old climate is gone. We do not get it back. This will be the best summer we can remember for the rest of our lives. It's 1.1 degrees Celsius global average temperature increase. It's only going to get worse. So the goal here is not to have people say, well, the doom and gloom, it's all over. No, we have enough time, just barely enough time to make sure it doesn't get beyond levels we can adapt, to which we can adapt, that we can survive. But we're literally playing with fire here, because as Canada burns up, well, not burning, I don't want to exaggerate, but as we see these fires, every fire releases more carbon emissions, which fuels more global warming. Every time permafrost melts, it releases methane that fuels more global warming. Every time the ice shrinks and more dark water is exposed, the oceans absorb more heat. The jet stream has already gone beyond any place of wonky that it's ever been before, and that's driving extreme weather events everywhere. Heat domes are, the situation we're in is exactly because the world we once knew has ended at our own hands. We were warned, we could have avoided it, we chose not to, because we put the profits of the fossil fuel industry above our children's survival. The question is, does this summer wake us up enough that we decide to stop doing that?
Un petit mot, Madame May, sur le programme des 2 milliards d'arbres. Je voulais juste savoir ce que vous pensez du dossier. Le gouvernement a rajouté 54 millions d'arbres qui vient d'un fonds géré par Environnement et Changement climatique. Un programme antérieur qui n'avait pas rapport. Il dit maintenant que le programme 2 milliards d'arbres, c'est 3,16 milliards de budget. Ça n'a jamais été fait pour planter 2 milliards d'arbres. Oui. Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
Je pense que la promesse de planter les 2 milliards d'arbres, c'est une promesse sans effort de mettre sur pied un système pour le faire, pour comprendre la façon pour le faire. Et maintenant, ce n'est pas un programme qui marche. Et c'est une question clé pour la Constitution du Canada. Dans la Constitution de notre naissance, la question forestière, qui a le droit de donner les preuves pour le coupable blanc, par exemple, c'est seulement la province. Mais sur la question du changement climatique, les forêts, ce n'est pas une jurisdiction seulement provinciale, pas du tout. Et les questions de changement climatique et pour la gestion de carbone, c'est une question avec l'aspect fédéral, puis aussi provincial. Et c'est le grand heureux dans la promesse de planter les arbres, c'est que dans le cœur du gouvernement, à mon avis, il n'a pas examiné les questions. Il pense que c'est seulement comme les provinces peuvent planter les arbres. Non, c'est difficile. C'est une question pour la biodiversité. Quelle sorte d'espèce des arbres? Où on doit planter? Pardonnez-moi pour parler un peu en anglais. If you look in British Columbia, where in 2017 we had a massive fire near where my husband's farm is, the Elephant Hill fire, took out a huge amount of area. It is normally, after a fire, trees come back on their own. But the Elephant Hill fire, like our new Pyrocene era, and John Valent's book, Fire Weather, is strongly recommended. We're seeing different kinds of fires, and they burn hotter. So the Elephant Hill fire burnt so hot that it burnt off all the ground cover, it burnt off all the seeds. No trees could restart. Nothing has replanted. It's critical for the federal government to get involved at this and work with First Nations particularly and get actively involved in, because where there's no trees on those hillsides, every rainfall brings a deluge of charred remains of previous forest and junk, and my husband can tell you, into every river and tributary where the salmon want to spawn, but the rivers are still, it's now 6 years after the Elephant Hill fire, but the hillsides still bring down so much of the debris from the fire that the rivers and the streams are dark, opaque, you can't see through them because of all the stuff there, so the salmon are struggling. A pledge from the federal government to plant trees is great. Partner with First Nations, make sure you're planting species that help arrest a fire. So deciduous trees or moisture help stop fires from spreading fast. We should be thinking hard about how to plant trees everywhere. And in the context of adaptation to climate change, in heat domes, particularly the homeless, desperately need shade. During the heat dome of 2021, in Vancouver, the police kept homeless people out of the parks for fear they'd set up tenting again. People died. They need shade. People need shade. We need more trees everywhere. And we need trees on rooftops. So the promise to plant 2 billion trees is great, but they didn't have a plan. They didn't have good, willing partners. They're developing it as they go. Certainly, First Nations are the first place to look. And also, they are working with some good urban tree planting groups like Tree Canada. That's all good. We've got to think about the federal government's role and the provincial role around forests in a completely new way, so that we're talking about managing our carbon budget, looking at nature-based solutions, many of which will involve forests. But if within the federal government, somebody makes a promise without thinking it through in the middle of a campaign, which is what I think would happen, and then you finish it up, and then the Treasury Board says, wait a minute, you can't do that without the provinces all signing on, and then wait a minute, everything stalls. Another promise that was made in the middle of the last campaign I'd like to remind the government of is we promised in 2021 campaign to stop shipping out thermal coal to other countries. We haven't taken a single step towards that. I will be back in Parliament again to be the perpetual crank that reminds people of their campaign promises. But we're now at a place where procrastination cannot be excused. Failure to perform expertly cannot be excused. We have to actually pull together and act extremely professionally as a country, every order of government and every party working together.
Just briefly, what date?
Last question.
What date did you see the documents, and how many minutes were you there?
Okay, I saw the documents. Okay, so I finished my top secret security clearance. It took quite a few days through the month of June. It was mostly through June, wasn't it, Deborah, that I did most of my meetings. I came back in to complete the security clearance and receive what they call the indoctrination. And that was on this Wednesday, August 16th, was it? Yes. And as soon as I'd finished that clearance, they said, and now you can see the documents. And so it didn't take long. It all took place here in Ottawa in a secure building.
But you were in the room for what, like 20 minutes, an hour?
Oh, I was in the room. I took a bit of a break because of my stroke. I should take a break now, actually. I went in at 9:30. I was pretty well done by mid-afternoon.
Thank you.
I think that's right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions, and I'll stay around, and so will Jonathan. Merci mille fois.
Merci.
À bientôt, j'espère. Merci.